Hello, welcome everyone to today's session with Katherine. You're welcome here in this open and friendly space, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, identity. All are welcome as you are. Try to make space for others and try your best to critique ideas, not people, and participate to the extent that makes you feel comfortable, whether it be by opening your mic or texting the chat. Also, please contribute to our community agreements. Last but not least, if there are any breakout rooms, there will always be a quiet room. If you ever felt that you didn't want to engage, this is a safe space, so we will pause the recording throughout whenever we share personal things. And you can text me or Katherine anytime. Thank you. You can take it away, Katherine.
Thank you. Let me find my slides here, and then I will take it away. Yeah. So you remember last time that I showed this image. I like this image of polarized lenses, partly because each of those lenses is looking at a different thing, right? You can see a different thing. And yet people have binocular vision, which means that if we choose to, we can focus on the same thing in the middle there. And maybe I like the metaphor of that. We can focus on something that we see together and maybe come to a shared understanding. So this is part two. My agenda for part two, besides getting the slides to move forward, here we go, is to do a little bit of recap about what doesn't work. To remind you that there are resources. I've put more resources in the folder, the MYFest Polar folder for you, as well as last week's resources are still there. So we're going to talk about what doesn't work with polarization, understanding polarization, and holding oneself aside. Go over that. The polarization part we'll go over in a little more depth than I did last time. And then we'll move on to, we may pause for some discussion. And then I'll talk about some activities for building bridging skills and some more resources for working with. So I think we all know what doesn't work when you're trying to interact with somebody who has strong opinions that differ from yours. Often we'll go into those conversations. We're pretty sure our way is the right way. It's hard not to say, how can you think that? How can you even say that? That's not right. But we know those don't work, right? We know those ways of interacting don't work. You probably have your own examples of statements that don't work when you're talking to people who disagree with you. And if we want to change minds, as I've said before, change happens at the speed of trust. This is not my aphorism. This is a mentor that told me about it. She's a change management expert. And that means we have to invest in relationships before we can change minds. So I'm going to go back to what is polarization. Polarization, in the way that I understand it, is a developmental continuum of how people react with difference. It was built from observation of people, research, writing down notes of what they said, thinking about what was an effective way to interact across difference. It is a 5-stage model, and I'm mostly only going to talk about polarization again today, as we did last time. If you want to know more about the 5-stage model, there's a great resource. It describes each of the 5 stages, and it will put you in contact with somebody who's qualified to do intercultural coaching through, which is something that I've learned. I'm one of the people in there, but we're not going to focus on that for now. Just say this is a resource. if you want to get tested in what stage you predominantly operate at, or your group predominantly operates, you would take the test. It costs about $18 for a student or $20 for an educator, and then you would have a coach interpret the results and suggest outcomes for you. Another way of thinking of this developmental continuum, very statistical one, is there's really, of the hundreds of thousands of people who've been tested on their effectiveness at crossing difference, really only 14% who are in polarization. So I know that at the last meeting, some of you said it feels in the US right now like everybody is polarized and we're afraid to talk about one another. And I think it certainly feels that way to me, but it's probably only 14% of the people who are really that rigidly in polarization. That's still more than one in 10, so that's going to feel like a lot, particularly if you're in normal social situations, a classroom or whatever. You're going to have more than 10 people. There's going to be some of them who are polarized. This model thinks of progressing to effectiveness across difference as a developmental process. And when I really like to look at this metaphor of a baby's development from birth until about their first year. They go through certain stages. This weekend, we happen to visit our grandson. He lives in Chicago along with his parents. He's about 10 months old now, so he's crawling very proficiently. He's pulling himself up. If he trusts you, but only if he trusts you, he will let you hold his hands and do something challenging, which is trying to walk upright. It would not be reasonable or developmentally appropriate to expect our grandson to run a marathon tomorrow. He can't even stand up. He doesn't have those skills yet. So when we are thinking about people who are cognitively in polarization, we kind of have to remember they're not ready to indulge in anti-racism training, as one example, or to talk about politics without a whole lot of support and trust, and otherwise it will just be too challenging for them. The other thing I want to say when we think about polarization, and again, the initial model thinks of it as an arrow that moves forward. It's kind of in the same way that child development does. It's almost inexorable unless there's some tragedy in the child's genetic makeup or in their environment, right? That they will learn to walk upright and by themselves. So in the first stage of this model, which is called denial, you deny that difference matters, or typically you deny that it's important to what you're doing. A business may say, cultural identity doesn't matter, it's all about our work identity. The background that you bring into the work is not important. We're not going to talk politics, it's all about getting the work done efficiently and effectively. When you've moved into polarization, however, you do recognize that identity and culture matters. In various periods of the USA, there have been times when marginalized cultural groups have recognized that their group matters. Black lives matter. Women's perspectives on what we do, what you do, what happens to our bodies matter. Same deal with folks who identify as gay, lesbian, transgender, and so forth. Being in polarization is a strength because you recognize what's important to your group, and it can feel regenerative for that group when that group has been societally marginalized. Folks who are not in that group, either on their own, they may stereotype, or they may get fed information that makes them demonize that other group. So when I was growing up, we were told that the Black Panther Party was possibly a terrorist threat, and that it was largely a criminal organization. In fact, I'm kind of ashamed to mention how long it took me to learn the Black Panther Party provided free breakfast programs, free ambulance service, freedom schools, free medical clinics, provided a lot of social services that the state was not able to provide for their community. And so, as I say again, polarization, particularly as compared to not noticing those cultural or political or identity differences, is a step forward. But it's not necessarily good when you have to work outside that group. So how do you engage with polarization? Understand that we all have our blinders, right? There are groups that I find it very hard to think about developing rapport with. Avoid strong cultural contrasts, focus on maybe teamwork skills or mindfulness. Again, it's going to be a challenge for them to directly try to focus on commonalities that they have with somebody that's different from them. And it's a challenge to try to introduce the historical context, as I just did with you, about the Black Panther Party, right? I didn't spend a lot of time on it, and we have some common interests and some trust built up from last time, so I felt comfortable bringing that up. So I went looking around since we met last time for, besides intercultural theory, what do folks say about how do you work effectively with people you don't really like? And I'm going to come around to this about 3 different ways, 3 different times during the rest of our time together this morning. Demonstrate respect, maintain perspective, seek to understand, be empathetic, and let it go. If it's bothering you, try to let it go. Try to take yourself out of the picture. This is from a Forbes magazine article, how to work 5 ways to work effectively. Because as I said, you want to change minds, change happens at the speed of trust. If you're judging other people, that trust is probably not going to happen if you're not empathetic with them. And you'll remember the tool I asked you to reflect with last time is when you have encountered difference, how did you approach it? With self-righteous disdain, with fascinated wonder, or with something in between? In order to do that, as we said last time, you need to be in right reference with your feelings and in a good state of self-care, so you're balanced, and you're able to not have a bad temper day, because these people may challenge you. And finally, last time we talked about the Celeste Headley 10 ways to have a better conversation, taking yourself out of the conversation, thinking about the emotions beforehand, and making a plan to try to talk to somebody, to be to be okay, uncomfortable, talking to somebody that you didn't agree with, just to learn more about their point of view. So I want to, Noreen, can you pause the recording for a little bit? Go back to my slides. So thank you for the discussion. Wonderful friends around the world. about practicing discomfort and learning to think about holding yourself out of the discussion. And now I'm gonna try to put the slides in present mode. I think we have it in present mode, and just run through some stuff kind of quickly that may also be helpful to you. This is another version of how to talk to people that you disagree with. Noreen has the slides, and I will also put them into the folder that I shared with you so you can come back with it. I particularly like do teach and be teachable. Do thank them for disagreeing with you. The honesty to disagree with you is really important. Don't let frustration overcome you. Don't assume the worst. Don't launch verbal grenades. We know these things and we still do them, particularly when we want to be true to ourselves or when we believe things strongly. Again, this is how you engage positively with polarization. You avoid those strong contrasts, focus on friendship, teamwork, mindfulness practice. And if you want to challenge them, such as you're working with students, then you want to support them in trying to find commonalities outside their bubble of the Black Panthers or the feminist movement or the political left or whatever it might be, or the evangelical Christian, or you can start to if you're lucky, you can start to talk about differences of opinion within that group with them, which helps them realize that there are people very similar in their cultural group that are closer to where you are on whatever spectrum of difference it is. So activity number 1 is a 15-minute activity that you might do. It asks you to think about 2 common proverbs, sayings. Often a culture will have proverbs that are almost exactly opposite in meaning. If you go to this site, it will suggest some that are American English speakers proverbs that seem directly opposite to one another. It'll guide you through talking with your students or your maybe your family. Maybe it's why this culture has opposite proverbs, and how do you negotiate a space of, if you really believe in one proverb or another, how do you decide to move forward in a situation? So it begins to talk about difference, but in a way that's not super threatening, as it would be if you were talking about politics. But you want to normalize talking about difference and finding solutions in a way that's not threatening. With students, I often talk learning styles, because everybody believes that an engineering student learns differently from an art student. And in fact, they might. Even the learning styles, there's nothing that says that learning styles are a real thing. It doesn't matter. It's a great place to talk about difference in education that actually seems to work for some people. So your purpose is not scientific correctness. Your purpose is having conversations around difference that are not threatening. That's really one of the things you need to learn to do to get beyond polarization. There's a nice core values exercise that University of Michigan has curated on their equitable teaching site. Download it quickly, because I'm not positive that it being a university talking about equity, that site's going to stay. But it comes with resources that talk about our core values, and will allow them to try to find common ground across those learning style differences or across some other non-threatening difference. Again, it's skill building. The skill they have to build is finding common ground outside their peer group. For that, I know I gave you the self-care chart last week, which is still in your folder for this. I also have an emotional resilience worksheet that asks you to sit down and talk about 3 to 5 things that are bugging you about a situation or about encounters that you have with a person of a certain type. It grows out of study abroad. So it's often talking about, oh, it's really annoying to me that this culture doesn't believe in getting to a meeting on time. But it can be used outside of that cross-cultural, just, okay, what's bugging me? And then it asks you to reflect on, all right, what can I do something about? Is this life-threatening? What can I learn to let go so I'm not in a perpetual state of quivering anxiety and upsetness? It's just a nice little reflection activity. If you've found a place of trust, as sometimes happens when you're learning to set yourself aside, next stage is, okay, let me set aside the things I can't change, worry about the ones that might be detrimental to my mental health or my physical well-being, as I talked about in the COVID example with my family, and move on to things that we can talk about. And then one other activity, this is a high-level activity when you've really got a lot of trust, or when somebody's able to find common ground with you. And it's one about how do we develop empathy for those that we hate. This is curated on the Hubicle. My understanding is the Hubicle will go under new management tomorrow, so I downloaded it into my MYFest folder for you with all the teaching instructions. This is really not the first activity I would do with somebody who's on that political far spectrum from you, but it's also a really, now I'm going to move on to what I call my resource fest. So these are going to go by kind of quickly, with one thing that helps me think about ending polarization or trying to put an end to it. I subscribe. Builders is a group of folks who feel that we are such a divided society. How can we find our common ground and learn to talk? So I subscribed to their weekly inspiration. Some weeks they don't have very much. Usually the weekly newsletter's got 4 or 5 things. Sometimes it's not super useful. Sometimes there's something that really gets me. They have a feed such as of articles such as this one about myths that are keeping us divided, or about a time when Democrats and Republicans agreed on something. And so that can be inspirational, and I do find it inspirational, as well as they have educational resources and ways to prep your discussion points, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I think is super useful. So that's another resource I have found. The Dignity Project is an interesting little thing. It's been around about 3 years, and if you know Tim Shriver, if that name resonates with you, he used to be the brother-in-law of President of the USA. They've created a thing called the Dignity Index, which is a scoring guide and helps you understand how people or advertisements or businesses are talking about difference. It's an 8-point scale. Each of them represents a mindset, from one that dehumanizes people, to one that recognizes the inherent worth in everybody. And they have training materials that can help you work on yourself, work with other people, help people recognize that that the words they use are harmful and are creating division. Their premise is that treating people with contempt causes division. Treating them with dignity eases division. And I really like this set of dignity phrases, again, for these conversations. Can you tell me more about that? Wow, I think just the opposite. Can you tell me how you came to that view? If we talk long enough, we're going to find out we share some values. I put the dignity phrases in your folder because I think they're so simple and can be so effective. But those are also available to you. What else have I got in? Oh, and this is my latest passion, is learning how to call in. So let me tell you a little bit of story about Loretta Ross. She offers trainings. That's the URL for the trainings. This is her brand new book, which I'm reading now. She tells you in the first chapter that she is a survivor of rape, and that she spent a large part of her young activist career building support services for victims of rape, primarily women, and gaining some fame and some expertise in that, and a lot of self-affirmation. And then one day she got a letter from a man who was in prison. He was in prison for having committed rape, and he was writing to her because he had found out that in prisons in the USA, rape by one inmate on another happens frequently, and he wanted her help in creating support services and a culture that was pushing back against that violent culture within prisons. And she talks about how astounding and astonishing and how deeply she had to dig to learn to call people in, even when their experiences seem diametrically opposed. It's absolutely incredible. But you know, I think she has an important point that if we keep dividing people into the ones that are not the same as us, we're going to be more easily manipulated, and we're not going to live up to the values of our societies and the challenges that the world needs. She has a wonderful chapter 6 in that book. Again, you'll see I'm coming back to self-care. Start with the self. Calibrate the conflict, by which she means, is this one of those ones that you're not in a place you got to walk away from now because I'm not in the headspace of dealing with this right now? If you are going to enter into a discussion with somebody, approach it with love. Accept the reaction that they give you. Don't let that stop you if it's not what you want to try to reach a resolution anyway. And these I really find key when you're approaching conflict. And the reason I share them with you is not because I'm an expert on dealing with conflict, because I'm an expert on running away from conflict. I know what needs to be done, and I find it very hard to do. I would not have dealt with the situation in my family I described had I not been under a high need of staying there to support that other family member. We must assume good intent. We must grant one another permission to be imperfect. We must bring a spirit of curiosity, as in the Celeste Headley techniques that you practiced and that worked for you. We need to call each other in. If the problem is, in our state, there have been cuts in healthcare recently. They affect everybody regardless of how they vote. and they across a broad spectrum of ages. If we're going to solve that problem in our state, then we're gonna have to work across political lines, across traditional divisions of class and race and so forth. We need to aim to build power with one another rather than trying for power, the power of always being right and always knowing the right way to solve a problem. So as I said, that book really speaks to me in this moment, and I highly recommend, if this is something you're worried about, and I know at least one of you has said that they are, looking into Loretta's trainings, and either starting a book group or reading yourself. The final thing I have really to share, when we talk across difference, we need to be ourselves. We need to ask questions that invite stories. We need to say, we're not solving these differences tonight. We need to watch for shutdowns and invite caring instead. And you can't go wrong if you love yourself, your participants, and your mission, your content. So, you know this already. This is where the resources are. This presentation will be in that box by Monday anyway, maybe sooner. If you want to give this presentation, feel free to give it. If you want to talk to me about giving this presentation, feel free to either talk you through doing it yourself or to give it to another organization. I'm happy to do that. I think that's all I have now, so I'm going to stop sharing. We might stop the recording, Noreen, and then anything you two want to ask or...
Would you like me to end the recording or stop?
Please end the recording, yeah.